The Beverly Wilshire Hotel in Beverly Hills, California, on the evening of May 14, 1989, 640 seats were arranged in a half-moon around a central stage, all occupied. The lighting was theatrical, warm tungsten flowing across a platform that had been built specifically for this occasion. The event was the annual Martial Arts Hall of Achievement Gala, a gathering that drew the industry's credentialed figures, film stunt coordinators, competition judges, dojo owners and actors who had built careers around the martial arts. Steven Seagal stood backstage at that moment. He was 37 years old, 6 feet 4 inches tall, 228 pounds, with black belt credentials in Aikido earned under the tutelage of a Japanese master whose name he had invoked repeatedly in interviews. His film career had begun 3 years prior. He had appeared in Above the Law, which had grossed $46 million domestically. He had appeared in Hard to Kill the year prior. He was ascending. The entertainment press had begun to refer to him as the new generation of martial arts cinema. He was known for a particular claim, that his Aikido was superior to the point fighting and sport karate that had dominated American martial arts throughout the 1970s and into the 1980s. His interviews often carried this theme. He spoke of street application. He spoke of the inadequacy of tournament training. He spoke with the confidence of a man who believed he had mastered something others had merely practiced. Chuck Norris was 50 years old at that same moment. He sat in a chair not far from the stage. He wore a dark suit, a white dress shirt, simple shoes. His hair had grayed at the temples. His frame remained compact and economical. No one in that ballroom needed to be reminded of his record: 70 professional karate championships accumulated over 3 decades. 3 times an undefeated professional champion. A film career that had produced The Missing Link, Missing in Action, Code of Silence, and 12 other feature films, almost all profitable. He was the elder. He was the established figure. He was the man for whom this Hall of Achievement had first been created. Nobody in that ballroom knew they were about to witness a reversal of the hierarchies they had constructed in their own minds. The event proceeded according to its schedule. A master of ceremonies moved through the evening in a pattern designed to accumulate. They introduced award winners. They screened film clips. They presented tributes. Then, at the 2-hour mark, they invited Steven Seagal to the stage for an interview. The master of ceremonies was enthusiastic. He listed Seagal's accomplishments. He mentioned the box office. He mentioned the Aikido credentials. He mentioned the upcoming releases. He sat down across from Seagal, and the conversation began. For the first 15 minutes, the interview followed a conventional path. Seagal spoke about his early training in Japan. He spoke about the philosophy of Aikido, its emphasis on harmony and redirection. He spoke in sentences that had the quality of preparation, as if he had rehearsed them, because he had. The audience listened with the attention they typically offered to accomplished guests. There was applause at intervals. Then the master of ceremonies posed a question. He asked Seagal about the state of martial arts in American cinema. He asked whether he thought the old guard, the karate-based action stars, the tournament fighters, had understood the true nature of martial combat. It was a softball question, or it appeared to be. It was designed to allow Seagal to expand on familiar territory. Seagal shifted in his chair. He leaned forward. He smiled the smile of a man about to deliver a line he had been waiting to deliver. He said, and these were his exact words, that American karate competition had become a kind of dancing, really, point fighting. No real application. No understanding of actual combat. You can see it in the films they make now. They look like they're fighting. The truth is they're performing. Real martial artists know the difference. He paused. He was not finished. Chuck Norris, he continued, came from that world, that tournament world. That's what built his reputation. But if you understand Aikido, if you understand how fights actually develop, he was never exposed to that. He never had to be. The pause that followed lasted 4 seconds. It was in that 4-second interval that the master of ceremonies' expression began to change. It was in that 4-second interval that people in the audience began to recognize what had just happened. Not a debate about fighting philosophy. Not an intellectual disagreement about 2 different traditions. A public insult directed at the figure sitting 53 feet away. A questioning of Chuck Norris's legitimacy delivered live to an industry audience. The master of ceremonies' hands had been resting on the arms of his chair. They remained there. His fingers did not move. His eyes shifted. He was looking toward the audience, or toward the back of the room. It was impossible to say which. He was experiencing the specific silence of a working environment when the floor of what is happening drops away. At that same moment, Chuck Norris stood. He stood without hurry. He stood without anger visible on his face. He stood the way a man stands when he has made a decision about something and the decision is old. He was wearing a dark suit. He removed the jacket. He folded it once, careful and deliberate, and placed it on his chair. He did not walk quickly. He walked at a pace that suggested he knew exactly how far he had to travel, and he would arrive at the precise moment he intended to arrive. The distance from his seat to the stage was 61 feet. The aisle was 6 feet wide. He moved through the center of it. The audience watched. No one spoke. No one moved from their seat except to turn and follow his progress. The recognition spread as he approached the stage, not a wave, but something more like the specific realization that occurs when a hypothesis held unconsciously for hours or years is suddenly confirmed. This was not going to be a conversation. This was going to be a demonstration. Chuck reached the stage. Steven Seagal rose from his chair. He was taller. His physical reach exceeded Chuck's. His preparation, if he was preparing, consisted of taking a small step back and raising his hands in an Aikido stance, both palms open, and waiting. This was the position of leverage redirection. This was the position that said, "You throw force at me and I will guide that force into a different direction entirely." Chuck Norris did not throw force. He did not step into the aggressive range that Seagal was defending. He stopped 8 feet away. He simply stood there. His hands hung at his sides. His posture was neutral. The silence in the ballroom had a weight now.
It was not the silence of surprise. It was the silence of understanding. It was the specific silence that occurs when 640 people recognize that they are going to see what they came for. And what they came for was never what they thought they had come for. When you understand a fight, you understand that a fight is not two men hitting each other.
A fight is a negotiation about distance. One man's distance control is another man's vulnerability. One man's waiting is another man's defeat already written. Steven Seagal's stance was built on the assumption that an attack was coming. It was built for reception. It was built for the momentum of aggression, which could then be gathered and redirected. It assumed that Chuck Norris would provide the force that Steven Seagal would transform. But Chuck was not providing. Chuck was waiting. Second one. Steven Seagal remained in his position. His palms stayed open. His posture remained unchanged. He was looking at Chuck Norris, waiting for the move that would define how to respond. This was not a mistake. This was protocol. A skilled Aikido practitioner waits for the form of the attack, then adapts to that form. Steven Seagal was following his training perfectly. Chuck Norris did not move. He stood at 8 feet. The distance held. Second two. Steven Seagal took a small step forward. He was closing the distance, gathering commitment. His intention was clear: if Chuck would not attack, then Seagal would determine how the engagement would proceed. This was where preparation becomes vulnerability. This was where the pattern of waiting for attacks suddenly becomes a disadvantage against a man who understands that distance is negotiation. The master of ceremonies had both hands pressed flat on the table in front of him. They had been in motion a moment earlier. They were now completely still. Second three. Steven Seagal stepped again. His hands remained open. His stance remained unchanged. He was now 6 feet from Chuck Norris. The distance was close enough for a committed move. He was still waiting for Chuck to attack. He was giving Chuck the opportunity to provide the pattern he would then redirect. Chuck Norris's posture had not changed. His hands had not moved. His face carried no expression that suggested either aggression or fear. His face suggested patience. It suggested that he was aware of something everyone in that ballroom was learning in real time. Second four. Steven Seagal's patience broke. He committed to a forward motion. It was a moment of force initiation. It was the moment an Aikido man fears, not the attack of an opponent, but the necessity of creating his own attack because his opponent will not provide the structure he was built to receive. He stepped toward Chuck Norris with his hands still open, his intention still to guide and redirect. He did not land this step. Chuck Norris moved from stillness into motion in one gesture. His movement was not large. It was not a lunge or a charge. It was a step that changed the angle of his body and removed the target his opponent had been approaching. His left hand rose and moved. And Steven Seagal's forward momentum suddenly had nowhere to go. Seagal's own force became the problem. He fell. He fell the way a man falls when he has lost his balance and his hands are still open. Which is to say, he fell quickly and without the protective reaction a fighter who was prepared would have. He hit the stage floor on his side and his back, and the impact was audible. The booth operator in the back of the room had been holding a coffee cup at mouth level. The cup descended slowly. She set it down on the table in front of her with a deliberate movement, as if this single action required all of her attention. Second 5, Chuck Norris stood in the space where he had moved to. He was not breathing heavily. His posture had returned to neutral. His hands had returned to his sides. He was looking at Steven Seagal on the floor. His expression had not changed. It suggested, now, the specific quality of patience that comes after an outcome has been decided. Steven Seagal did not remain on the floor. He rose quickly, his hands pushing against the stage. When he was upright, he stood for a moment without moving. He looked at Chuck Norris. He looked at the master of ceremonies. He looked at the audience. The specific architecture of his face had changed. Shock was giving way to something else. Humiliation was giving way to something else. Chuck Norris did not move toward him. He stood at the distance he had moved to. He allowed the silence to persist. The silence was not hostile. The silence was the response. Then Chuck spoke. His voice was quiet. It carried the particular gravity of a man who is saying something to an opponent, not to an audience. He said only this: everyone has a choice. You can choose to be wrong with humility, or you can choose to be wrong while defending your pride. The difference is not small. It was not clear whether Steven Seagal heard him. It was not clear whether he was choosing to walk away or simply walking away. He turned from the stage and descended the stairs on the far side. He did not return to his chair. He did not return to the stage. He walked to the rear of the ballroom, and someone opened the door for him, and he left. The master of ceremonies remained at his table with his hands pressed flat against its surface. He did not rise. He did not speak. He simply sat there, and the weight of what had just happened, the weight of a narrative he had been constructing, a narrative in which Steven Seagal was the new generation and Chuck Norris was the past, had shifted entirely. Chuck Norris returned to his seat. He picked up his suit jacket from the chair where he had placed it. He folded it again and placed it across his lap. He sat, and the event continued because events in industry ballrooms continue the way the world continues. With or without dramatic incident. But the event was no longer about what anyone had planned. What happened next was the part that nobody expected when they walked into the Beverly Wilshire that evening. The story, which had been contained in one moment of silence on a stage, began to move outward. A tournament director sitting in the third row had been present. He attended competitions across 12 states. He told the story in his car to a competitor driving with him to San Francisco. The competitor told it at his dojo. The dojo owner told it at a trade show. A stunt coordinator who had been present mentioned it to a film producer she was working with. The producer mentioned it to an interviewer. The interviewer mentioned it in a podcast in a casual way, as if the listener might already know this story, might already know what had happened at the Beverly Wilshire. The story mutated as it traveled. In some versions, Steven Seagal had initiated a physical challenge to prove his Aikido superiority. In other versions, Chuck Norris had broken Seagal's arm. In still other versions, the confrontation had lasted 90 seconds instead of 5. In some versions, Seagal had apologized immediately. In others, he had walked out in silence. The story became the specific kind of story that lives in the martial arts world. The story that proves something about the difference between filmed martial arts and fought martial arts. Between philosophy and application. between confidence and competence. Steven Seagal did not speak about the incident publicly for 13 years. When he finally addressed it in an interview in 2002, he characterized it as a misunderstanding and said that Chuck Norris had responded to a theoretical statement in an inappropriately physical manner. He said that his Aikido was designed to work on the street, in real-world scenarios, not in performance contexts. He said that one moment of physical contact, however it occurred, did not validate any particular system. He said this with the quality of a man defending a position he knew was no longer defensible but could not abandon entirely. He said this with the quality of a man living alongside a story that had become bigger than the truth of what occurred. Chuck Norris, for his part, never told the story himself. He was asked about it by journalists, and he acknowledged it had happened, and he said it was a private matter that had been blown into something larger than it was. He said he regretted that it had become public. He said that Steven Seagal was a talented martial artist and a capable performer. He said these things with the quality of a man who had moved past it, because he had. The incident was, for him, not the story. The story was what it meant. The story was what it taught. In the decades after, the incident became shorthand in martial arts education. Instructors would reference it when teaching about the difference between theoretical technique and practical response. They would reference it when teaching about the importance of adaptive timing over fixed form. They would reference it when teaching humility to students who had begun to confuse confidence with competence. They would reference it without always knowing the full story, or the precise facts, or whether the version they were teaching matched what had actually occurred. But they would reference it because the story was true in the way that myths are true because it illustrated a principle that needed illustration. The principle was this: the story a man tells about his capabilities and what he can actually do at speed are two different things. The distance between those two things is where real training lives. The distance between those two things is where character is revealed. It was not unique to Steven Seagal. It was not unique to 1989. It was not unique to the martial arts world. It was the specific principle that every field of human competence discovers when it has paid attention for long enough, that the person who speaks with certainty about what he knows is always one step away from discovering what he did not know. That humility is not a weakness of character. That humility is the sign of someone who has actually engaged with a difficult thing. The years after 1989 moved forward, Steven Seagal continued making films. He made more than 70 films over the next 3 decades. Some were successful, some were not. His public profile evolved. He moved into different genres. He became interested in seismic science. He became involved in international affairs. He adopted causes that many in the entertainment industry found controversial. His Aikido credentials, which had been presented as his foundation, became less central to his public identity as his film career expanded. This was perhaps a choice made deliberately, or it was simply how identity evolves over decades. Chuck Norris continued making films as well. He made Walker, Texas Ranger. He made dozens of features and television appearances. He became a cultural figure larger than his martial arts record. He became a folk hero. He became the subject of jokes, thousands of jokes, billions of jokes. Jokes that transformed him from a person into a category of humor. He did not seem to mind this. He seemed to understand that being a joke in the American context was a kind of victory. It meant you had become something bigger than your skills. It meant you had entered culture in a way that outlasted your career. The incident at the Beverly Wilshire did not end Steven Seagal's career. It did not diminish his filmmaking opportunities. It did not reduce his earning power. What it did was settle something. It settled, for those who had witnessed it or heard about it, where the line stood between theory and practice. It settled the question of whether a challenger could be genuinely skilled and still be wrong about what his skills meant in an unpredictable context. It settled the question of what happens when two men in their training have built different assumptions about how a fight works, and those assumptions meet in a specific 4-second moment. The specific power of the moment was not that it proved Aikido inferior. It was not that it proved karate superior. It was that it proved the difference between a man who had built his understanding in the controlled environment of theoretical training, and a man who had built his understanding in the open context of actual competition. That difference is the specific difference between knowledge and wisdom. That difference is the reason that true teachers speak quietly. That difference is the reason that true teachers wait for understanding to arrive rather than demanding that others accept it immediately. In the years since, Chuck Norris has spoken rarely about the incident.
When he has spoken of it as a moment he regretted becoming public. He has said that he would have preferred for it to remain private. He has said that he was defending his reputation, which was the only response available to him in that moment.
He has said this with the quality of a man who knows that his greatest strength was never his ability to defeat an opponent in front of witnesses. His greatest strength was that he understood that not every test needs to be public, not every challenge needs a response, not every insult deserves the honor of attention. The incident has become, in the decades since, a kind of touchstone. It is referenced in martial arts circles. It is referenced in film studies. It is referenced whenever the question of authenticity and performance arises. It is referenced because it was a moment of absolute clarity, a moment when the gap between confidence and capability became visible to everyone watching. It is referenced because it proved something that most people only learn through long experience, which is this: the man who is genuinely confident does not need to announce his confidence. The man who is genuinely competent does not need to prove his competence. He needs only to wait for the moment when competence is necessary, and then to respond with the precision that decades of genuine training have created. That is the lesson. That is what the Beverly Wilshire incident teaches. That is why it persists in the narrative of the martial arts world, even as facts become unclear and versions multiply. The story persists because it is true in the deepest sense, true about human nature, true about the difference between knowledge and wisdom, true about what it means to move through the world with patience and respect for the boundaries of what you actually know. Next week, we will examine the evening Chuck Norris accepted a challenge from a retired Navy SEAL instructor who claimed that military hand-to-hand combat rendered all martial arts tournament training obsolete. His argument seemed sound. His credentials seemed unassailable. And then something happened that changed the direction of how American military close-quarters doctrine was taught in the decades that followed. That story, and how it unfolded, is the account we will present when you return. If you have found this story valuable, if it has illustrated something about the distance between confidence and competence, if it has deepened your understanding of what training can mean when it is approached with humility instead of certainty, then make sure you are subscribed and comment below where you are watching from. Tell us which confrontation you believe was most instructive. Tell us what you have learned about yourself from a moment when you discovered that what you believed about yourself was not what the world revealed about you in a test you did not expect.